Hey everybody, my name is Tommy the Game Master, and in my last video I did say I own this game, but I wasn't going to review it for a while. Then I decided to sit down and play it to see if there was enough to talk about, both good and bad about it. And oh boy, there's more to talk about it than the last one. Now, Hollow Fragment here doesn't piss me off as much as Hollow Realization does. It has a better implemented story, not better story overall, but the way the narrative was implemented, it just didn't really get me angry like the last one did. A little less cringe in the fan service department, and of course, when a side quest actually popped up, there was at least a 50% chance I had to go into the field, look for something, and then fight a boss. Too bad the actual game is still hot garbage. But there is at least one thing I did like that kept me coming back for well over 60 hours, and a mode that I did wish was attached to a better game. Now before I really do a deep dive, I need to let people know I'm going to have to give this game a bit of a graded curve. Despite it being a modern day Steam release and even having a PS4 port, it's really not made with modern technology. What this is a Vita port of a PSP game that was given a PS4/Steam release. So yeah, we're getting a game that was eaten and regurgitated twice to get us here. And none of these ports did anything actually get done to actually upgrade the way it was looked or the way it's run to make it presentable on consoles. But because of this, I will almost have to forgive the PS2 looking character models and just the lack of details in the environments. As well as the fact that the camera, if it got any closer to my character's back, would be giving him a colonoscopy. But that's not to say that the rest of the game here has problems that can be overlooked or even forgiven. And trust me when I say this, there's plenty for me to bitch about when it comes to Sword Art Online Hollow Fragment. Okay, this game is an odd duck. In a lot of ways I could describe the game as a Siamese twin of a JRPG. There are two games here that are connected at the hip, with the two somewhat different stories connecting to a certain point and going back and forth between each other. So let's talk about these two stories. Starting with the actual main story, the Ancrad arc. Yes, Hollow Fragment takes place in the world of Sword Art Online, so it's still set up as a death game. Characters die here, they die in real life type setup. That said, it doesn't really add anything to the drama or anything to the game story as a whole. Game story, a lot like Hollow Realization, the main plot and its concern is mainly about chasing waifu tail. So much that Klein's the only other male party member that you can pick, and he has no side quests that are devoted to him or any character development in any way other than being comic relief. Anyways, let's get talking about the main plot here. Sword Art Online Hollow Fragmentation starts where the first arc ended, with Kirito finding out that Heathcliff is actually Kayaba, the guy who imprisoned them in Sword Art Online, and challenges them to a duel. However, unlike the show where Kirito barely won the duel here he completely wipes the floor with Kayaba. But then a bug occurs and Heathcliff disappears, breaking his word to release the other characters if Kirito won. So having no other choices, the players head up to the floor 76 in their continuing quest to get to floor 100 and conquer the Ruby Palace to get to the exit. But more bugs occur, making it impossible for them to get back to the lower floors. And then just out of nowhere, Kirito's cousin/sister, Leafa, appears out of nowhere, and they quickly recognize each other, which makes no sense. The second arc of the series was how they went on adventures with each other, not realizing who they were IRL, and developed feelings for each other, which was definitely cringe, until she figured out who he really was, and then it went from cringe to just plain weird. And the reason she appears here is equally stupid. She supposedly got a hold of the original Sword Art Online headgear and was able to hack her way in from Elfheim Online. Yeah, a 14-year-old girl can hack her way into Sword Art Online with just some stolen nerve gear If it was that easy to hack the game, you think the Japanese government would then hack the entire game and send in military personnel and give them super buffs? And if you think I'm just talking crazy, wait until I talk about the quote-unquote villain. But at any rate, as bad as Lifa's sudden appearances, it's still better than how they bring Shion into it. She just falls through a plot hole to get here. No, I'm not kidding. She just falls out of the sky. Later, we find out it was due to a medicaboid malfunctions. Medicaboid is another thing that if Sword Art Online got off the harem thing, could make for decent sci-fi plots. Basically, it's a device that if someone is, say, chronically ill and bedridden, they can strap them on themselves not only to experience virtual worlds, but also control machines in the real world so they're just not stuck in a hospital bed. The game also is pointing out it can be used for psychological uses, but we won't really get there because Shinon here is for fan service, not for character and plot growth. What do you think? This is something other than a Sword Art Online game? At any rate, as the game starts to clear the rest of the game, they find a mysterious new player named Straya, whose whole design screams fan service, and is of course now in love with Kirito because why the hell not, and acts something like a big kid. But the more they bump into her, the more they realize she's not altogether normal, experiencing mood swings and terrible migraines as they progress towards later levels. Eventually, she starts teleporting and turning on them. It's eventually realized she's actually Yui's sister, which wasn't a plot spoiler to me. It was spelled out at the beginning of the Hollow realization. But anyways, due to system issues, it's becoming highly unstable. It's up to you at the end of the game to choose if you want to save her or not by taking a part of some sort of ridiculous side quest that requires you to fight several monsters and bosses and not die, or else you start over on a quest that could take over 30 minutes. It was the only really hard part of the game, but hard for the wrong reasons, because if you die you have to start over, and I decided I'd skip that part because quite frankly I didn't really care at this point if the digital waifu made it. After all, Kirito has plenty of women to replace her. Oh, and I guess before I go, I should talk about the villain. He has a name, but he's so forgettable in the story that I don't even remember his name. I suppose he's actually supposed to be the villain from the Alfheim arc, teleported into Sword Art Online, and he is here to cause trouble and experiment on the players, just like he was in the show. Basically, he shows he can hack the system because he has a quote-unquote super account that lets him do that. Of course, Straya, before completely losing herself, manages to take away his account, and Kirito then just kicks his ass. He's only in a few cutscenes. He adds nothing to the story other than a few easy-to-win boss fights. Sure, the idea of someone who doesn't care about the other player's well-being and has godlike abilities to cheat the system and basically sexually assault women could be a scary setup, but nothing materializes out of it. I guess I should say at least one good thing about the story. It does give us an idea of what the last few floors of Aincrad could have looked like and where the final boss could have been if they hadn't stopped it at the 75th floor in the show. So that second mode of the game is called the Hollow area. In this area, we find Kirito is mysteriously transported to another world of the game where he runs into Philia, an orange player, or basically a player who has murdered another player. And in Sword Art Online, it means she has basically committed murder. In this area, Kirito finds there no safe areas, no towns to replenish his supplies, and every player except Philia is kind of acting like being stuck in Sword Art Online is no big deal. Feeling sorry for Philia, Kirito decides to explore the Hollow area with her to see what's going on. Although you can bring any of the other waifus, some quests are Philia dependent, so it's just better to travel with her as your second party member. Kirito hopes there is a way to get Philia out and to remove her orange cursor because she doesn't strike him as a bloodthirsty type, and figure out what this new area is that is so different from Aincrad. And you know what? I think the story in the Hollow area is actually pretty decent and way better than the main. It's not overburdened with cutscenes or fan service. Philia here is for the most part a likable character. She's not super trustworthy, and she's also suspicious of Kirito. And considering what she's been through, and when they find out what the Hollow area is, the players here aren't real. They're AI reconstructions based on players who have died in the Aincrad part of the game, and now they kind of exist here. And if you're wondering how Kirito can get here so easily, he can get here because he's Kirito. No, there's no excuse. The system just chose him to come here because he's good at the game. There's no other reason given. At any rate, so basically everyone here is a computerized ghost, and this does freak Philia out so much she starts to make decisions that almost get Kirito killed. She is a character that feels more complete and better written than most of the other waifus. At least in the Hollow area. Once you complete this area and she becomes another one of Kirito's harem back in the Aincrad portion of the story, she's just another gal who just wants to get it on with Kirito, but during this quest, she's not a bad character. The villain, who I guess is the ghost of the Laughing Coffin leader, who wants to corrupt the entire Aincrad area of the game and merge it with the Hollow area so he can basically go on a killing spree undeterred, is actually a lot more threatening than this putz. And oh yeah, with the ghost story, they do address the whole Sachi thing. You know, Kirito's first girlfriend dies in a dungeon right in front of him, and if the series continued on with that tone and character development for Kirito, it would have been an actually really great anime. She's here in a few side quests to do, and their interaction is pretty decent. Overall, I did enjoy the narrative of the Hollow area. Too bad to actually complete the game after that. I had to go back and do the Aincrad story again. And oh boy, the gameplay, especially in the Aincrad part, is dull. So let's talk about the gameplay in Aincrad. A lot of people say Kirito is a Gary Sue, or basically a male version of the Mary Sue. A character who is overpowered, doesn't really earn that power, doesn't really go through trauma or have any sort of shortcomings. If they were any more perfect, they would be able to walk on water, and they make for dull characters and really dull stories. And for the most part, yeah, he's always going to win because he's always going to be OP in the anime, and that he's a nice overpowered guy that helps these dames out a time or two. It doesn't really show why they want to drop their drawers for him, or what's so special about him as far as the story and the games or the anime is concerned. But I would argue in a video game that really doesn't matter. Link from Zelda is a Gary Sue. As you can always tell, he is going to get the Master Sword and any other magical power-ups he needs to defeat Ganon. That is always his destiny, and he just will always be in line to acquire such power. Now, what isn't okay in a video game is to make the character Gary Sue when it comes to the gameplay. Link may be destined to take that sword, but there's better to be at least 3 dungeons with MacGuffins in them before he manages to acquire said sacred blade. This game takes Kirito to being an overpowered Gary Sue and then applies it directly to the gameplay in some of the worst ways possible. You start with Kirito being over level 100. Now if you're going, well, he's been playing this game for a while and he's up to the 75th floor, starting him at 1 would be kind of crazy. So if they're just saying he's 100 but all enemies and other characters are at level 100, so it's basically level 1, so there isn't a problem, right? Wrong! They don't do that. Your basic enemy at the beginning of the game and most of the way through the levels are in their 80s and early 90s, so Kirito here is already OP. And to make matters worse, they have an HP bar that is always regenerating, and you can earn a spell early on called Protection Prayer that amps this feature up to super maximum. I think Kirito from the anime stated his opinion on the feature.
I've got to save him! He won't last!
MMOs that use leveling systems are unfair that way.
Yeah, I really hate to say it now, but it's basically making Kirito here invincible, except to that random strong enemy that you can just sometimes come across on your journey. And you better fight them too, because they're the only characters that can give Kirito decent enough EXP to level up. Yeah, it takes tens of thousands of EXP points to level up, and most of your standard enemies may drop about 10 to 20 EXP points. What the hell were they thinking? This doesn't make the game fun, it makes it a frickin' slog. But that's okay. They did find a way to make it mildly more challenging, or should I say frustrating. If the waifu dies, you still get a game over, and you get to watch not only Kirito's health, but your partner's health too. And no, there isn't a way to easily throw out potions and spells to make sure that they're cured. And don't expect them to help you out when your HP gets low either. They're kinda useless. In fact, the AI is pretty basic. If you find yourself in a bad situation, you can expect a 50-50 chance that they will use a healing item on themselves, and if you don't use it on them first. But for the most part, they're just there to extend combos, and beyond that, they can be pretty brain dead. I mean, they can get stuck behind walls and rocks and other stuff, and the game even just freezes themselves up sometimes. Hey, Asuna, are you there? Woohoo! Oh, there she goes. She finally snapped out of it after like 30 seconds of being frozen while I was fighting a pretty strong enemy beforehand. So basically, Sword Art Online is, a lot of cases, is just a really frustrating escort mission throughout the game. It's why I kind of chose Asuna as my chief waifu, because she's basically on the same level of Kirito from the get-go. Choosing characters like Lifa and Shino were way too risky because they start in the 70s. And you know what? The fact that the game states that bugs have caused the reason he can't log out and can't go back to the main town or any of these other things, they could have easily just said the bugs resetted him back down to level 1 and he'll have to earn back all the things he has earned before, all his skills and stuff. It would have been far more interesting experience as a video game to start Kirito as level 1. The overall battle system isn't much better. It's clunky, the animations are long, and when you do a special skill, you have to watch the whole animation, no canceling it out. And yes, that can get you killed sometimes if the monster's beating up on your partner, especially because you can't heal or stop until the whole thing's played out. So basically, type B to swipe, then hold one of the triggers to select magic and the other to select physical special attack with some orders to give the waifu, and press both to display your whole array of choices if you didn't decide to set up a quick select pellet. Again, most of these moves will make short work of most enemies. Some of the bigger ones do require you to do some of the bigger flashier moves, but overall it's pretty simple and it's not a very interesting battle system. Like I said, most of the enemies will fall in 1 or 2 hits. Some of the bigger monsters might cause you some trouble, but for some of the wrong reasons. The good news is that the hollow area doesn't have as much of these problems. Sure, the enemies do start out a bit weak, but as you complete goals and get into new areas, you quickly find them increasing in power and becoming a bit more threatening. It's still a cakewalk unless you walk into an area with some super-powered enemies, which can happen. And the game does want you to clear out these enemies, because if you get spotted by anything, it really is better to fight them than try to run away. If you do try to run away, they just tailgate your butt until you get into another area. It's almost comical. So the hollow area, although not super hard most of the time, did get me some enjoyment and some hard fights and some easy level games because I went through it. It felt a little bit more well balanced going through the hollow areas, and I actually enjoyed that part. Speaking about that, let's talk about how you progress in the 2 modes. The Aincrad area is pretty easy to get through for the most part. Basically, here's what you have to do on each floor. Number 1, find the boss in the labyrinth. Number 2, find a special enemy with boss's info. He's a bit more powerful than your average monsters, meaning he's about 15 levels under Kirito instead of the usual 20 to 30, but you can still wipe the floor. Occasionally you do have to go out of your way to find him, but most of the time he's just stuck in a corner of a map. Complete a certain side quest that is on the quest board to get the final boss data. Usually not hard, but the game does make you occasionally kill 5 or 10 monsters in which only 1 or 2 spawn on the floor, so Happy camping, Kirito. You're going to need it. Then you got to get the whole guild together for a boss run where you will fight the boss. But they're usually not too hard. They're more damage sponges than anything. I did die a few times on these bosses, but that's because I wasn't paying attention to my HP. And it did change for the most part once I completed the hollow area and came back being even way more super OP. After the boss is done, another floor opens and you get to repeat the process. That is the way progressing through the first 20 floors or so. The last few do have some interesting twists, but for the most part it's pretty easy to get through. Each floor takes about half an hour to an hour. Start on the field, small dungeon, then the labyrinth, and then the middle floor in Ikrad, then the boss room. Repeat with only a few interesting ones like this one where the dungeon is damaged and Kirito and Asuna have to use teleports that flip the room around. It was a short but enjoyable kind of romp, and it was definitely different. Most of Ikrad, though, are just boring, same old, same thing slogs that I did not find enjoyable in the least. The hollow area, on the other hand, is just one huge area with secrets, secret paths, and puzzles that have to be solved to get through the game. It's not by any means difficult to figure out how to get around. Usually there's a pretty generous mark in the map that says to get to this room and where you have to go to get there. But there are plenty of puzzles and mini bosses to fight, and again, thanks to the free roaming nature, you can encounter enemies that may be a little stronger than you are to give you a little bit more of a challenge in EXP. You know, balance kind of what you want from an RPG. You can also find dead end rooms that have a lot of loot and again high-end monsters to level up. And if you do die, the game for the most part is pretty easy. You get warped back to the beginning of the area, losing some of the EXP and items gained the first time through the room. That said, the room and areas can be pretty big in the hollow area, so watch your health if you decide to conquer a room with monsters at a higher level. In order to proceed through each area, you do have to do a few tasks and get to the boss of an area and beat it up to power up a charm that lets you open the gate to the next area. It's simple, but it doesn't ever seem to be convoluted, and again, just the ability to free roam and the encouragement to seek out new areas made this area of the game extremely fun to me. It's too bad that this part of the game is the most unstable, though. Don't get me wrong, bugs and other problems exist in all areas of the game, but my computer just loved to freeze up and even a crash just exploring some of these areas in the hollow area. My computer may be old, but it can run the likes of Attack on Titan, Neo no Kune 2, or even Halo Reach without skipping a beat. So it should run an HD port of an old PSP game quite easily. Still, despite this, I found myself hooked just looking around these different areas, and I found it to be very entertaining. Not entertaining enough to recommend it for its $20 price tag, but it was entertaining enough that I did kind of forget about the graphical problems and some of the frustrations and just had fun with this part. It was kind of unique. Yeah, I can forgive the PS2 look of this game. It was originally a PSP game after all. That said, I have seen several good PSP ports like Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep that did it right and even improved upon a few things. Sword Art Online doesn't improve anything. The character models are still very polygonal and not very well representative of the characters in the show. The environments are just plain bland, and of course the camera that is really too close, but I could forgive those things. What I can't forgive is the frame rate. I am not someone who pulls out his frame rate counter and starts having a hissy fit every time the game frame rate drops from 60 to 59. It can be a bit unstable because sometimes action games do require it for resources. Fighting a large group of enemies can sometimes be taxing and therefore the frame rate has to drop. Not a big deal. As long as that drop is an even 60 to an even 40 for a while and back to 60 quickly, I probably won't notice. But when you bounce around like a freaking trampoline and go well below 20, you bet I'll notice, especially when I need the vomit bag. Yeah, this game gave me the case of motion sickness just from the amount it just bounced around. It is really that bad. I think a PSP game done with bare minimum port to the Vita, then a bare minimum port to Steam, should be able to run smoothly on my PC. After all, the Neptunia Rebirth games worked perfectly on my rig. Again, this game only features a Japanese subtrack. I'll be a little bit more forgiving than the last time because this game again was originally released on the PSP and the Vita, and it's not like either one of those had a huge fan base out here on the West, especially the Vita. There was like, what, a dozen of you guys who picked that system up? And there is some decent music found throughout. Sound-wise is the only thing I really can't find too much to complain about, but there isn't much to really brag about either with this game. It's just not good. Would I recommend Sword Art Online Hollow Fragment? No, not really. Bad frame rate, boring RPG mechanics, and just bugs. Tons of bugs everywhere. Make this game a no recommendation for me. Still, the Hollow area is worth checking out if you can find the game for under $5. And if you have a lot of patience to boot. Otherwise, just skip this game. Well, I do have one more Sword Art Online game to get through, and I do want to play this one eventually. It was made by Dimps, although I hear it is the worst game they've made. I'll take a worse game from a good developer than the crap I just played. So I'll review Fatal Bullet some other time when I have the time. There's just other games on the backlog right now. Also, I'm kind of tired about talking about bad games. It's been a chain of really mediocre games on this channel for a while. Let's talk about an actual good one. Mario Galaxy is next.